We now have the closest we'll get to official viewing numbers for Andor Season 2, and they tell a very interesting story, not just about the show, but the future of streaming for Star Wars. All that and more in today's video. This is a video I knew I'd have to make at some point because we're starting to get some streaming data for Andor Season 2, and this show is in a really interesting position where it's really one of the few Star Wars projects which has received almost total critical and fan acclaim. But there also is sort of that undercurrent that a lot of ordinary Star Wars fans aren't necessarily tuning in because Andor lacks many of the common traits we associate with Star Wars, whether lightsabers or space battles, but we'll get back to that in a moment. But before we do, let's talk numbers. Just a brief note before we get into things, however. I've updated the Eckhart's Ladder store with some new magnets and stickers for those building fleets. We've got the Venator in several colors, the Dreadnought, and more. It's a ton of fun. I've also put together a new fleet with all the ships that you can use, so link as always down in the description. So, of course, we don't get official hard data from Disney themselves. They keep that very close to the chest. But what we do have is numbers from third-party agencies like Nielsen. Now, Nielsen uses their data to extrapolate larger viewer numbers. Basically, they test a portion of the population and apply that broadly. So the numbers aren't exact, but it is useful to compare the Nielsen numbers of one Star Wars show to another. So for the week of April 21st, Nielsen projected 721 million minutes viewed for Andor. Those numbers are okay. Andor Season 1's 3-episode premiere had 624 million minutes viewed, so it's certainly a step up from that, where Star Wars shows have generally fallen in terms of viewership over time. Though, for comparison's sake, Mando Season 3 had a 1-episode premiere and 823 million minutes viewed. And that is worth talking about. Nielsen doesn't simply report how many people viewed the most recent episode, rather they give numbers for the entirety of the show. Now, for something like Andor, obviously the newest episodes are generating the vast majority of the watch time, but sometimes, especially with syndicated programming, things get silly where you've got a large backlog of episodes sort of just being watched again and again with crazy high minutes. That being said, if I was to summarize my feelings on just the basic numbers, I'd say they're okay, but not spectacular. Another firm, Luminate, has also posted some of their viewership data, which contrasts, interestingly, Andor to other shows, which, again, peak early and then slowly lose viewers. Andor, on the other hand, progressively seems to be building a viewer base. And if you were to ask me, I'd say that, especially for Season 2, there are a few reasons for this. The first being that it's tough for the average person to keep up with a show releasing nearly 3 hours of content a week, especially with everything else on streaming. Andor also, I think, has less of the I need to watch it right now factor that a show like The Mandalorian does. You know, Andor is kind of tough to spoil. So I would imagine that both hardcore Star Wars fans are watching it with a little less urgency, but also the general public too. But I mean, the other factor is quality. Andor Season 2 is, in my opinion, the best season of Star Wars television we will ever get. The show may be the best single piece of Star Wars media, so it seems like we're not getting the same drop rates as with some of the other shows, and rather the opposite, where word of mouth seems to be drawing new viewers. It is helpful for the show to have all these articles about their high consecutive IMDb ratings. Today we also got word that Andor is being submitted for 23 Emmys, big ones as well. Best writing, directing, lead actors, supporting actors, actresses, and more. It is, however, with shows like The Pitt and Severance, a tough year for competition. What's more, it's important to note that an Emmy submission is a lot different than a nomination. A submission is basically Disney putting PR behind the show and its actors. There could be fewer nominations, there could be more. Anyway, we're getting off track. I think the quality of Andor is not really up for debate. It doesn't hit for everyone, and I think that's fine. Some people want something else for Star Wars. They don't like the pace of the show. I understand that. But for anyone who does appreciate the type of TV, whether Star Wars fans or not, Andor is a phenomenal product. And that takes me to my next point of the discussion. And that's where Andor sits in the current reality of streaming television. It's not really useful to compare Andor to The Mandalorian Season 1 because streaming's not like that, and Disney Plus is not like that. I see Disney Plus as a weird platform. I have 3 kids. We have Disney Plus. I do watch the new Star Wars programs on it, of course, but other than that, we consume no Disney Plus original programming, and I'm guessing despite the high subscriber base, actually I watch some Marvel stuff, but despite the high subscriber base, I think a lot of people are just there for Disney's massive back catalog of movies. They've got Disney, Pixar, Fox, there's so much on there, and I honestly think compared to Netflix, which is being driven by both existing properties and Netflix originals, Disney originals just don't have the same pull to them. And that's why we've seen Disney, I think, pull away from Star Wars and Marvel TV shows. But streaming as a whole, I also don't think is as healthy as it was. And I think there are various reasons for that. It does seem to be a bit of a pendulum between theaters and streaming. I think the pandemic probably threw the streaming pendulum a bit further one direction than it was naturally going. And I think people made business decisions based on the streaming numbers, which weren't necessarily going to continue forever. And I think as a result, we saw some bad products released by people trying to capitalize on increasing streamed viewership, and that sort of had the opposite effect where people ended up just tuning out because of all the noise. And I bring that up because, while it is worth talking about Andor's numbers and references to past Star Wars shows, Nielsen also gives us a top 10 list, and I do think it is worth noting that Andor cracked both the top 5 for original streaming productions and the overall top 10. And I mean, to speak of the weakness of Disney Plus streaming catalog, the only other show in the top 10 was Bluey. And this is also a good lesson about how these minutes are calculated. Andor's viewing numbers are for all 15 episodes, but you look at, for example, the only other Disney Plus product on this list, and it's Bluey with 154 episodes. You has 53, but even more importantly, they dropped the entire final season all at once. So the minutes viewed for this one particular week are very high, but you'd expect it to drop off as well. NCIS is another example, a very bingeable show where people are probably, just putting on a random episode in the back catalog, 486 episodes, 788 million minutes viewed. So overall, I think Andor being top 4 in originals is pretty good, but it also, given the relatively soft numbers overall, I think speaks to the weakness of streaming right now overall. So I think the raw numbers aren't great, but overall, in terms of viewing share, not bad. All this to say, I don't think it really matters. We're almost certainly not getting another Andor. I think Star Wars has unfortunately moved away from streaming as one of their main places for content, which is sad. Maybe I'm wrong. There was word that Andor did generate a ton of money in signups for Disney Plus, but it does seem like they're back to focusing largely on movies, which I think is unfortunate because you can't really do what Andor did with movies. The character development of the show needed 12 episode seasons and 2 seasons to get to where they were by the end of episode 24. But truly, this is one of the reasons why I'm happy they moved to the 2-season format. There's a very real possibility Tony Gilroy doesn't get to complete his vision based on the changing nature of streaming and Andor's somewhat niche appeal to Star Wars fans. So overall, I'm a little surprised by the numbers. I can't really say in a bad way. I think the Andor numbers are lower overall than I hoped, but better when compared to other streaming offerings right now, which is a weird place to be. I do think compared to something like The Mandalorian Season 3, however, Andor will drive viewers to Disney Plus for a very long time. It's extremely high quality, but those are my thoughts. Let me know yours down below.